Welcome to the fourth and final episode in a Legendarium series about Justinian's Wars. In part 4, the Reconquest of Rome, we will talk about how Emperor Justinian sent his greatest commander Belisarius into Italy with a mission to take the greatest prize of all, the city of Rome. By the year 536 AD, Justinian had come close to realizing his dream of reuniting the Roman Empire. As well as pacifying his eastern border, Justinian retook North Africa. Yet Justinian still needed to retake Rome itself to make his reconquest complete. Italy had been peaceful and prosperous under the Ostrogoth king Theodoric the Great, but since his death in 526 AD, the peninsula fell into civil war because of a series of weak kings. And to learn more about how Roman Italy came under barbarian rule, follow the link to my video in the description. Though Justinian feared that Belisarius dreamed of making himself emperor, Justinian still chose Belisarius to lead the expedition because he was by far the greatest Roman commander of his day. By then, Belisarius was about 30 years old and already becoming a legend in his own time. Belisarius moved his army across the Aegean by ship and landed in Sicily in 535 AD. He then landed in southern Italy the next year. Before Belisarius could advance on Rome, he had to take Naples, where he arrived in the summer of 536 AD. After failing to convince the population to submit, Belisarius subjected the city to a month-long siege. The local lords defended Naples so stubbornly that Belisarius feared he would have to starve them out, until a curious foot soldier found a destroyed aqueduct that could be used as a tunnel to bypass the city walls. Soldiers made their way along the aqueduct into the city, climbed down on an overhanging olive tree branch, and made their way through the streets to a tower in the wall. After surprising and slaughtering its defenders, the squad held the position while their comrades roped together their scaling ladders, which Belisarius's carpenters had built too short, and climbed the wall. Fighting continued through the morning, and when resistance finally broke down, the angry Roman troops swept through the city, slaughtering civilians. Belisarius had hoped to avoid such a massacre, but it spread fear through southern Italy. As word of Naples' fate spread, several other Italian towns opened their gates to the East Romans. Even Pope Silverius sent word to Belisarius that he would be welcomed in Rome. The Ostrogoths, growing increasingly fearful for good reason, blamed their misfortunes on the weak leadership of their king Theodotus, a fat man who had become Romanized and more interested in riches than in defending his realm. Indeed, Theodotus tried to flee, but was killed by his own soldiers on the road to Ravenna, after which the Ostrogoths elected a warrior named Vitigus as their new king. Vitigus pulled his troops north to guard against the neighboring Franks before he dealt with the invaders. Indeed, he left the Ostrogoth garrison in Rome to its fate. The Roman people proved unwilling to risk the anger of Belisarius by resisting him as Naples had done. Most of the Ostrogoth garrison abandoned the city. Only their commander, Luderus, felt honor-bound not to leave his post and waited for Belisarius. Belisarius in turn sent Luderus to Constantinople, where he gave the keys to Rome to Justinian, a gesture which said that the emperor was now master of Rome. Yet Vitigus did not intend to let this stand. He gathered his forces with enough men and supplies to besiege Belisarius in the walls of Rome for a year. Rather than simply wait for Viticus's arrival, Belisarius walled up several of the gates, knowing that he could not defend them all, and he also feared that some of the townspeople might open the gates to the Ostrogoths to end the siege. The Tiber River made up part of the city's defense and was spanned by the Milvian Bridge, where Emperor Constantine had defeated his rival Maxentius and became Rome's first Christian ruler. Hoping for reinforcements from Justinian, Belisarius fortified the Milvian Bridge with a tower and a small garrison. He believed that a small force on the bridge could easily hold off a much larger force, especially since it could easily be reinforced by the main garrison. Yet the mercenaries in the Milvian Tower proved untrustworthy. Shortly after Vidigas's huge force arrived, the garrison deserted to the enemy and handed over control of the bridge to Vidigas. The next morning, Belisarius went on a reconnaissance into the area with 1,000 horsemen, unaware he no longer held the bridge. A large body of Ostrogoth cavalry took him by surprise. The deserters recognized Belisarius, who was mounted on a white-faced bay, and urged their new comrades to attack him. Yet Belisarius, fighting sword in hand, engaged the Ostrogoths in a bloody fight in which 1,000 men died. While the Ostrogoths fled to their camp, Belisarius hurried to the gates only to find them closed to him. In fact, Belisarius was already rumored to be dead, and the Roman garrison, failing to recognize their own commander in the dark, feared that the Ostrogoths would follow the fugitives into the city if they opened the gates. And the Ostrogoths did approach Belisarius's party, ready to finish the fight. At that point, Belisarius simply charged across the bridge. The Ostrogoths, surprised and fearing that he would be reinforced by fresh troops, withdrew, and instead of pursuing them, Belisarius turned back to the city and was finally admitted. Despite hours of combat, Belisarius had not been touched by a single weapon. And Belisarius immediately began work rebuilding the fortifications to prepare for the Ostrogoth assault. It took the Ostrogoths 18 days to construct 4 siege towers as tall as the city walls. Each contained a battering ram. The Goths also lashed teams of oxen to the siege towers to haul them to the gates. Other Ostrogoth soldiers stood by with scaling ladders to let their comrades climb over the walls. On March 21st, the Goths began their assault, and the Roman soldiers only stared in fear. Belisarius remained cheerful as he took up his bow and killed an Ostrogoth officer at a great distance. His men hailed him, and then Belisarius commanded his soldiers to shoot, not at the Ostrogoth soldiers, but at the oxen pulling the siege towers. The animals died in a hail of arrows, and the towers came to a halt without reaching the walls. His men also defeated a later assault at Emperor Hadrian's tomb by breaking up the memorial statues and hurling the stones at the enemy. As the siege dragged on, the Goths destroyed the aqueducts that powered the flour mills in Rome, so Belisarius set the mills in boats on the Tiber River within the city walls and suspended the mill wheels in the flowing water. Later, the Ostrogoths took the port of Rome a few miles from the city itself, where the Tiber flowed into the Mediterranean. This cut Belisarius' supply route to Justinian. Belisarius assured the people of Rome that reinforcements were on the way, but none arrived, despite his repeated requests to Emperor Justinian. Belisarius began to fear that somebody in Rome would betray him, so he changed the locks on the city gates and rotated the watches over them so the Ostrogoths could not make bargains with the guards. At night, Belisarius' men, joined by hounds, patrolled the trench outside the walls. Some of these men intercepted a letter from Pope Silverius to King Vidigas, in which he offered to betray the city. Belisarius had Silverius shipped into exile while a new pope was elected. The siege dragged out for a year and 9 days when word finally came that Justinian had sent reinforcements. By then, King Vidigas had plundered all the farms in the region to desolation, and his men went hungry. After a few last desperate attempts, Vidigus withdrew early in the year 538 and left Justinian the master of Rome. 2 years later, Belisarius took the city of Ravenna and made Vidigus his prisoner. Justinian then offered the Goths terms which Belisarius believed to be too generous. The Ostrogoths could keep part of their kingdom and only surrender half their treasury under these terms. Most likely, Justinian planned to use the treasury to finance another war to complete the conquest of Ostrogothic Italy. The Ostrogoths trusted neither Justinian nor his terms, but they did trust Belisarius, who had always behaved honorably to them during the war. The Ostrogoths answered that they would agree to the terms of surrender if Belisarius endorsed them. Yet Belisarius felt he could not do so as the emperor's soldier and servant. So a faction of the Ostrogoth nobility suggested a way around the problem by simply making Belisarius their new king. Belisarius pretended to accept their proposal, but loyal to Justinian, went along with their plans to crown him, and then had the ringleaders of the plot arrested on charges of treason against Justinian. He then claimed the whole of the Ostrogoth kingdom and the treasury in the name of Justinian. That wraps things up for this series in the Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.